Hi, everyone. My name is Ed Beck, and I'm one of the current leads for Quality by Design. I'm the lead of Group 1, and I know that our lead for Group 2 is also in the room. So we have both groups here. Welcome. And we are joined today by Mike Daly. Mike Daly is the Director of Operations for SUNY OER Services. SUNY OER Services is an organization that supports OER and the faculty and students who use it across all of New York State. And he's going to give us both an overview of what OER is, that acronym we keep using, and then also we're going to do a presentation really designed for people currently taking QBD. And we're going to take some of the big themes of QBD and try to answer how do open resources help do these things.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for inviting me to this session. To steal a line from the Allman Brothers, it's certainly great to be back where it all began. I myself was a QBD graduate a few years ago. It seems like forever ago, but certainly some lifelong lessons that have stayed with me. So for those of you who are in the cohort, hopefully you're getting as much out of it as I did. I know that it's a worthwhile venture, especially this time as we all seek more flexible opportunities and deeper investigations into how to improve teaching and learning in response to COVID-19 situations that may or may not be relevant on our campus. As Ed said, I'm going to walk through a quick slideshow to kind of unpack some mystery and some intrigue behind open educational resources. You will hear me refer to open educational resources as OER. I'll unpack a definition of those for you as well. You'll also hear me talk about courses, and this is sometimes a loaded term. I certainly don't want to present that what I'm talking about are kind of off the shelf black box courses that kind of take over faculty's control and freedom and flexibility. We use the term courses when we talk about our catalog very loosely. They are packaged content that for some faculty do fit the needs immediate to the learning outcomes of a certain course. Other faculty we find use them as sidecars or bits and modules throughout a course, or we've had tutoring centers or academic support centers use some of the resources that I'll highlight and some of the opportunities that Ed will show to provide supplemental instruction in a tutoring environment, whether offline or on site. So I'll reinforce all of these. I also will be monitoring the chat while Ed is doing some presentation. We're going to go back and forth. Ed will do some interior presentation. I'm going to do some top level slides. But certainly in this time we have together, which is about 55 minutes now because I've yammered on way too long, we're not going to be able to touch on every topic, but I will certainly provide contact information for myself and Ed for you to follow up with any questions you might have. So I'm going to be able to share my screen now. Thank you, Ed. I realized before I joined this meeting that I was prepping for presentation. I needed to make sure I had the right presentation going. So we should go there. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. So I do want to say, some of you may know Ed Beck as an instructional designer at SUNY Oneonta. Some of you may know him as a facilitator of the QBD or Quality by Design course that you're currently engaged with. We are also lucky to have Ed as a part-time staff member at SUNY OER Services. We steal about 20% of his time from SUNY Oneonta, and he provides some expertise from the instructional design standpoint for SUNY faculty that do choose to use OER in the ways that I'm going to talk about. So we're through the welcome and introductions. This is kind of a quick map of where we're going to be heading. Where we're heading next is open education resources. Again, OER. I'm going to do a quick definition and introduce what those are to those of you who might be new to them. We'll move on to OER and how they might provide some learner support or support for students that are learning in new environments, whether those are blended modalities online or face-to-face. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about how OER, and especially how OER in SUNY is presented, some specific strategies that SUNY decided on about 3 or 4 years ago with content presentation in mind, but also with accessibility in mind. We'll spend the largest chunk of our time towards the end of the hour talking about how OER and the offerings that are available through SUNY at no cost to SUNY faculty and students do provide what we think are a meaningful level of interaction and collaboration between faculty and students, and also between faculty and faculty. And hopefully we've chunked out some time at the end, the last 10 minutes or so, to have a beginning of what I hope is a longer conversation offline, but did want to provide some time for questions and answers today. We'll jump right into defining OER. So I think most of us are familiar with the symbol that I'm showing on the screen, it is the letter C surrounded by a black circle, and next to the letter C are the words "all rights reserved." That should trigger immediate thoughts in your mind of copyright. Copyright is a long-standing legal and also ethical and moral presence in our lives. Most things that we interact with on a daily basis that we consume, whether through media, written word, visual images, do have some level of copyright. Copyright is certainly important. It protects original thought, original ideas, original creations, and it provides the original creator of that content with some legal protections in terms of how they get to use the material and how other people get to use the material. Copyright is not an arduous process. If I asked all of you right now to take out a pen and a piece of paper and draw your dream house and gave you 30 seconds to do that, and at the end of those 30 seconds, I said, look up, that image that you drew on the picture, by definition, because it's in a fixed tangible medium, would be copyrighted. It existed nowhere else previously. You put it in a fixed tangible medium. You as the artist or the drawer of that picture now hold copyright to that picture. There's no legal process to file for a copyright. There's no application you have to put forward with a patent office. Copyright by definition really says as long as something didn't exist before, it's original and it exists in a fixed tangible medium, copyright exists. Open educational resources don't remove copyright from our lives or the materials that we're creating. What open educational resources do is kind of flip the model. So instead of saying that copyright belongs to the original creator, and no one else can use it unless express written permission is asked for and supplied, open educational resources, which are teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permit repurposing by others, really have education and learning in mind. At the forefront, they're suggesting to creators of original content that in addition to holding the copyright of the material, they can also indicate for the next person, the next user, the next faculty member, the next instructor, the next student, how that creation can be used. So there's no back and forth that needs to go on. Obviously with public domain materials, those are things that are so far out of copyright. All of us as global citizens have legal access and legal permission to use those materials. If we think about Shakespeare, Shakespeare is out of copyright. So all of us can use his material in ways that we want. Insofar as publishers can take that material, repackage and sell it. They're essentially taking public domain content and putting a price tag on it. Creative Commons licenses are probably the most common talked about feature of open educational resources. And those are the ones that extend permissions at the beginning for creators to say to the next person, hey, I still own this thing, the original thing, but here's some permissions that I'm giving you as another creator, as another user, so you kind of know at the forefront what you can do. I talked about public domain. I like to bring up the fact that I think in day-to-day life, we're not often aware of how much material is in the public domain and how much material enters the public domain every year. Last year in 2019 was a large celebration. A large number of creative works that were originally published in 1923 entered the public domain, including Robert Frost, just about his entire collection. There's a couple poems that are published a little later that aren't yet in the public domain. But if you think about your interaction with Robert Frost, that New England poet of various quality, depending on who you talk about, and the expectation that maybe his work is copyrighted and protected forever and somebody is holding on to that material just doesn't hold true. It's now in the public domain. So we can have 7 roads to Virgin of Wood if we wanted to, because public domain, we have the ability to alter that image a little bit. Creative Commons is an international organization. About 15 years or so ago, they came up with what they call the Creative Commons licenses. Those are the extensions of copyright, and I'll show what they look like in a little bit. In that time period, since the Creative Commons was first established and the licenses were first rolled out, there have been, and this is counting, 1.6 billion works, images, text, media, really anything that's in that fixed tangible medium that have a Creative Commons, that have an open educational designation on them. 1.6 billion works in counting. I am quite certain that all of you are more than busy enough and that sorting through 1.6 billion works and trying to find the best resources for your particular course, for your particular class, is an impossible task to be facing. That's one of the strategies and one of the ideas behind SUNY OER services is we as a shared service organization in SUNY, working with any SUNY campus and any SUNY faculty, can kind of unpack some of the mystery, find the best resources, and in fact, we go to great lengths to repackage some of those resources, working with some of our partners to present material that we think pulls out the best of that 1.6 billion stuff and puts it in a place that's easily findable and easily adaptable and used by you. Perhaps a more easy way to understand Creative Commons licenses than walking you through the legalese is this image that I'm showing, which on the left of your screen in blue boxes and white letters is 5 R's. I'm going to scaffold down the 5 R's and talk about some of the permissions that Creative Commons licenses and OER provide for all of us. The first one I always start with is retain. When you choose to use an open educational resource or create an open educational resource and put a Creative Commons license on it, you do not lose control of your copy of the content. You as a faculty member, you as a student, you as an instructor, you as an individual, still own that version of the thing, and no one else can own it or take ownership of it. They can certainly reuse it. We can certainly reuse content. So if you put a Creative Commons license on something that you made, you are telling the next person that they have permission to reuse that content in an unaltered form. You could also extend permission that the person would have the ability to revise your version to ways that worked for them. And then they would have their own version that they had control and copy of. You would still keep yours, so yours doesn't disappear. The revise aspect is quite important, I think. We work with a lot of faculty members who find content, whether in our Ready to Adopt catalog or in other resources that are available on the internet that say, yes, this works, but I really talk about this psychological or this sociological or this college success term in a very specific way. And revise really means down to the sentence level. It can also mean rearranging content, reordering content. But if you think about the ways that you present or talk about material in your class now, you can mirror that language, that conversation in the actual content because of this revise, this third R. You can remix. Much of our catalog, of which I'll talk about in a couple slides at oer.suny.edu, is a massive remix. It is content from those 1.6 billion Creative Commons licensed materials I've talked about that have been remixed, some from here, some from there, to really present a package, what I talked about earlier in quotes, course that represents a pretty significant alignment to learning objectives. You can also redistribute, and that's a choice. So if you make something, you can say, yeah, it's a Creative Commons license, and I put a Creative Commons license, but I'm really just keeping it in my Blackboard shell, or I'm just keeping it on a private website that I share with my students. There is no mandate or edict by Creative Commons, by SUNY OER services, that anything that you revise, that you reuse, that you remix has to be shared with anybody else. That's a choice that SUNY faculty get to make on their own. There's nobody who will ever pressure you to share unless you want to share. We can certainly facilitate that process for you. I've mentioned our Ready to Adopt course catalog. SUNY OER Services put this together with 2 of our partners, Lumen Learning and Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative, otherwise known as OLI. We did this back in 2017 with a large advance from the New York State budget of $8 million to further advance OER in New York State. So $4 million of that goes to CUNY and $4 million of that goes to SUNY. We've been lucky to receive that funding for the last 3 years. Fingers crossed, we're hoping to receive some and or all of that funding this coming year as well. Certainly budgetary pressures are yet to be determined as to what access we'll have to funding. But what you will see in this catalog really speaks to the legislative intent of those dollars, which is a focus on high enrollment, general education courses. And certainly high enrollment is interpreted widely across our system. What might be high enrollment at Cobleskill might not necessarily be high enrollment at University of Albany, and vice versa. So high enrollment, again, is a local decision. But you will see mainly, as Ed talked about at the beginning, a focus on 100 and 200 level courses. The other thing about this catalog that I do want to stress is the courses in here meet or exceed accessibility standards. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And all of the material is designed to easily integrate into your learning management system. So whether you're a campus that uses Blackboard, Moodle, Desire to Learn, Canvas, I think I've named them all. There's probably one more I'm forgetting. The material that you see here that we'll look at in a little bit more detail later easily integrates into your learning management system. So I mentioned briefly about SUNY's start with some funding from New York State in 2017. The story goes much farther back than that, but for our purposes, we'll talk about 2017 as a starting point. To date, if we add up all the students and all the courses at all the campuses we engage with through some self-reporting, over 400,000 SUNY students have been enrolled in an OER course across our campuses. The New York State investment of $12 million, so $4 million for 3 years, has saved SUNY students and their families close to or a little bit over $47 million in traditional textbook costs. One of the biggest advantages of open educational resources, because they don't adhere to copyright and there's no monies being exchanged in terms of royalty, is they are at significantly less cost. And indeed, all the materials in the catalog I just talked about, oer.suny.edu, are at no cost to SUNY faculty and students. Across SUNY, there's over probably now 2,300 faculty teaching with OER, and that number continues to grow. I always like to tell faculty, if they feel like they're stepping out into a wide abyss and on their own, whether they're teaching an Italian course or an animation course or maybe a nursing course, there's probably somebody in SUNY who is either teaching that material with OER or at least thinking about it and eager to engage with other faculty members who are thinking about it the same way. And most importantly, we're beginning to see positive impacts on student learning from courses taught using OER. And we'll talk a little more specifically about the ways in which we're seeing that. And it's not just replacing content. There's some significant changes, which I think speak to the quality by design participants and the structure of that course. Some significant changes that go into the redesign of the course when OER is chosen as learning material that certainly facilitate those improvements. I'm going to talk quickly about learner supports, almost on time. Obviously, when we're thinking about choosing learning materials, without even knowing it, most of you on this call, I know that you're choosing learning materials that you feel are appropriate to best support the learning that your students are being asked to engage with. Open educational resources are not an exception when it comes to providing direct supports for how students learn and how you as a faculty member want your students to learn. In our catalog, you will see mention of some specific platforms or supports that students can engage with. So from left to right, oops, too quick there. Our personalized learning platforms certainly use open educational resources as the content basis. More importantly, they're aligned to outcomes. So there's outcomes listed at the top of every course, at every chapter, so you can see which outcomes students are being asked to work towards. There's frequent practice and feedback. One of the early hypotheses of OER was that if you just open up access for students and give every student access to learning materials, they will magically improve as learners. What we've realized through some significant studies, I say we royally in the academy and higher education, is that unless students have the opportunity to engage or do and provide meaningful ways for them to do that in the structure of a course, that learning doesn't really move all that much. The personalization in these platforms, and specifically I'm talking about Waymaker, which is offered by Lumen Learning and Carnegie Mellon's OLI, we think have been designed, and we've seen it time and time again with faculty who choose these resources to really enhance faculty-student connections. And they do so in a way with data-driven improvements. And so there's a unique understanding of how students are engaging with the material, how that material can be better, really down to the outcome level, down to the content level, based on the ways that students are engaging with the material. Those of you math faculty on the call, or maybe any chemistry faculty, OHM, or online homework system, is comparable to a MyMathLabs or WebAssign. Again, the content at OER. There's outcome alignment and there's frequent practice and feedback, so faculty can structure opportunities for students to engage in low stakes yet meaningful ways so they can better understand their own process of learning. The most basic, and I don't mean to disregard this, but the most basic format or learner support structure we provide is Candela. Candela is a platform. It's an ebook platform. Obviously, there's OER content that's in there. We're talking about OER. There's opportunities to align that to outcome, but there's very little opportunity for faculty-student connections, for built-in interactions with students. There's very little opportunity for students to have that doer opportunity where they're actually engaging with learning opportunities based on some material they may have just read, heard about, or watched. I'm going to turn over to Ed now. I will stop my share. Ed's going to give a live demonstration of one of the more personalized platforms I just talked about, which is Waymaker. I turned to Ed for this, not only because he is a trained instructional designer and kind of understands the intricacies of this, but he also worked on a project all of last year with some faculty at SUNY Oneonta, where they developed content material for Spanish 1 and 2, which is in the Waymaker platform. It has a unique understanding of this platform as a learner and as a designer. Ed, there you go.
Okay, so I am in a course on the SUNY Oneonta Blackboard, which we've imported a Waymaker cartridge into. This one just happens to be biology for majors, but if you go to that oer.suny.edu, you can see all of the different Waymaker courses. And one of the things I want to show you is for each chapter, what happens is we get a folder brought right into Blackboard. And I'm going to show you what it looks like all by itself. When we talk about Waymaker, we're actually talking about two parts. We're talking about a study plan, which is the course readings, and we're talking about a quiz, which is an assessment based on those readings that will go back into the grade book. But one of the things that Oscar asks us to ask about our courses is, are there frequent assessments that students can get to assess their own understanding of the learning? And one of the fundamentals of Waymaker is they've built that into the course. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up a study plan. And it's going to open up right in my browser. And you're going to see, okay, if I was thinking about this introduction to biology, this is a chapter in my textbook, we're going to get, here are my sections of my textbook. Here are the different areas. And I'm going to start here at the top. They like to start every single chapter when it's an Illumin product with, why does this matter? They want to ask the question of, how do we apply this to the real world? And that holds true whether we're talking about a psychology book or a biology book. Why does this matter? As we go through, we can just use our next and previous buttons to go through this, or we could exit back out to the study plan to see all of it. The next thing that it always gives students is a completely practice quiz. Here's an opportunity where we can take a little practice quiz, a little pre-test to prime the pump, remind students about what they know already and what they don't know. And if I were to go through and take this pre-test, what it would do to my study plan is it would actually mark my study plan up with different colors. I have a demo version of Waymaker right now, so I'm going to click a little link at the bottom here. And this is what my course might look like after I took my Show What You Know. I get little prompts at the bottom here where I seem to be on track with my learning for this section, but this section of the textbook, I still need some work. This might be where I want to spend a little bit more time. As I work my way through this course, I have chunks of content, reading, 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 and each one of these readings will finish with a little self-check. As I go through here, here is another little practice quiz meant just for me where I can choose to see how I'm doing so far. And they've chosen to do this, and I think this is really clever and really fun. They've chosen to do this with certainty-based marking. As they go through, they want students to be aware. When am I pretty sure this is the right answer? And when am I guessing? What is the simplest living thing? I don't really know what the difference between an organelle and a cell is. This is still early for me. I'm going to guess organelle. And look what it does. It gives me right in the moment just a little bit of feedback that says, oh, here's what an organelle is. And here's what the right answer is. So this is built into every single course. Every single section of the textbook has questions that I can do that are practice and are just for me. And then those all feed back into kind of a unit or a chapter test that then can go directly into the grade book. So I go through here and I do all my readings. If I go back out here, I have a quiz. These quiz questions, the ones that will now be going into the grade book, this is no longer just for me. And let me just tell you that I'm a teacher in here, so I've taken this way too many times. By default, a student can take this twice. And you have control over that settings. You can give them less or more attempts at this. But the main idea is that students would be given multiple opportunities to try to master the same concept or idea. One thing I want to say about Waymaker is not a complete course. It's not a complete canned course. But I think, especially as we're thinking about converting a lot of classes to online learning, it could be a great start to a course. So I just started this morning. I wanted to look at what could I do to build around Waymaker to make it into a more complete course. And so what I did was I added in the introduction to the course that QBD says is so important. I added in a task list of things that students should be doing. The study plan becomes an important part of that, but I wanted to add in, how are students going to be interacting with each other throughout this course? Maybe there's an assignment that students would do that is just personal to them, is not a group assignment, but I would still use that quiz at the end to give my modules a repeatable structure. And this might be something that's really helpful to our faculty that are converting courses and want just something to start with, to be a foundation they can build around.
Thanks, Ed. Some great questions in the chat, so hopefully you'll be able to answer a few of those. I grabbed some of those as well. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and talk a little bit about slide here. Content presentation and accessibility. So I just kind of walk through how open content from our catalog looks like in Blackboard. I will say that we're using Blackboard here. The content integration is the same no matter what your learning management system is. And perhaps most importantly, when you integrate that content, it doesn't take over your course or your course shell. You still have full capability and ability to do to add content, to build additional content, to integrate discussion boards, to bring in video, audio, other elements that maybe you want to add to your course. So it's a presence in your course, but it doesn't take over your course. And perhaps more importantly, there's no one else that has entry other than your student into your course when you do integrate that learning content. So you're not opening up your course to external eyes, as it were. When we talk about accessibility, I think a pretty simple sentence or a pretty simple series of sentences is asking your question, not accessible. It's not an educational resource. I think that's a pretty simple question and answer. If something isn't accessible, it's not an educational resource. By extension, then, it's not an open educational resource. So if something isn't accessible, if it doesn't meet accessibility standards for whatever the end needs of the user might be, it's certainly not accessible. And that holds true for our catalog, certainly. It also holds true for content that might not be in our catalog. And I think particularly the 5 R's that I talked about earlier, and in this case, that revise R, where we as users, as faculty members, as instructional designers, as instructional technologists, have the ability to adapt, adjust, modify, improve, or alter the content at the moment we need to, when we need to, the specific reason we need to. Really puts accessibility at the front of the conversation and allows us to make material that might not be accessible, but yet we want to use in our courses accessible in ways that just aren't possible with traditional copyrighted, publicly produced materials. For those of you who ever had gone through the process of requesting an accessible copy of a traditional print book before, it's certainly a process that can take some time. We often have to connect with the right person at the right organization or the right publisher to get that content. It might not arrive in time for the need to meet the needs of the student. With open educational resources, as we consider bringing those into our courses, this revise element certainly lets us or those who support such practices on our campuses bring that content up to accessibility standards in much quicker ways. We've mentioned 2 partners that that SUNY has in its OER initiative, Lumen Learning and Carnegie Mellon's OLI. By statute, by law, both of those partners have to supply VPATs, but I really think, which are voluntary product accessibility tests, I really think the drive in our relationship with both Lumen and OLI is to go beyond VPATs, to really suggest that accessibility is a moving target and things should always be looked at and continuously improved as standards change, as needs change, as technology changes, and what worked maybe in one HTML instance or one WordPress instance or one CSS instance might need to be updated as coding changes. So one example of that, and I mentioned earlier the Online Homework Manager, which is really a math homework platform that Lumen offers, is they recently in November 2019 added Desmos. Desmos is the only accessible interactive online calculator that's on the market. It's now an element that's in OHM. So faculty who are creating questions, it's a graphing calculator. They can create questions on an online graphing calculator, providing students with an accessible option to really engage with the content in ways that matter to them, but also meet the needs of students who might require a screen reader or a braille reader. I will share out this presentation. There's a link on this slide that brings you to kind of a quick demonstration of how Desmos looks like in that platform I just mentioned. Certainly worth taking a look, and certainly appreciate our partners' attention to always increasing accessibility and access for all of SUNY students. So again, a quick blurb about Desmos. This will be in the presentation I share. It's technology that uses sound to help visually impaired and blind students to determine the position, size, and shape of graphed material. Again, you don't find many products out there on the market or in the marketplace of education materials that provide an online graphing calculator that also meets accessibility requirements. Desmos does that with ease.
I'm just going to interrupt Mike one more
Yep.
time. Sometimes I get the question as a campus lead for OER, why are we partnering with a for-profit company? Why are we partnering with a company like Lumen Learning? And what Mike just went over is exactly the right answer to that. Not only did they find content, but they're improving it. And they're improving it for accessibility, and they're improving it for all learners. And I've got to tell you, I was the person that did the Accessible Math webinar for SUNY Accessible Math Week. The Desmos integration into OHM is one of the coolest accessibility features that I've seen in any online math platform. We have situations where we've got currently used SUNY platforms, or I'm sorry, not SUNY platforms, but platforms being used in SUNY that don't meet basic accessibility standards. We've got a partner in Lumen that says, not only am I going to meet the basic accessibility standard, but I'm going to make sure that graphs have ways that students can crawl through them and see through them. I think that's really, really cool.
Thanks, Ed. Pretty much right on time, which is absolutely amazing. We're going to talk a little bit now about, and I know that the chat is certainly active and busy as I'm presenting. I don't have the opportunity to look at the chat, but keep firing the questions there. Ed's monitoring it, and I'll review those questions as well and follow up as needed, maybe after the session if I can't fully answer some questions that are in there. So again, sticking with the large buckets or themes of quality by design, we want to spend some time talking about interaction and collaboration when talking about using or considering using open educational resources. One case that I always like to point out is a faculty member at the University of Buffalo, Jess Kruger, who recognized that there was a lack of quality material, open material in her discipline, in the course that she was looking to use open content in. It's a health management course or a health industry course. And what she decided was to use a platform that we mentioned earlier, Candela, but also engage with her students and have them work in teams as really content developers. And so in teams, they were assigned the task of creating chapters or modules or outcomes that she specifically thought were relevant to the objectives of that course. So students really became co-contributors, co-facilitators in the process of not only content development, but learning. In the picture here of the students celebrating their final version last fall, where she printed out their textbooks, so all their productions compiled into one entity. And I will say too that as students were creating, they were also assigned some peer review responsibilities, some peer editing responsibilities. So they were actually collaborating in groups and in larger groups with their classmates as well. Perhaps most powerful was the students' response to this experience. And so the first quote was really rewarding. As students who have to buy really expensive textbooks, we hear that from students all the time. This just brings power back to the students again. It's like, wow, we are all published authors now and so young. It's really awesome. I think that level of enthusiasm, regardless of the experience, in this case, we're talking about an open educational one, is something that we can all strive for as educators. To get students excited about learning is probably the most successful thing that any of us can do in our classrooms. And the second quote, it just feels like we are really learning because we're teaching ourselves. Again, I'll go back to what I talked about earlier, where students, through research, it's proven that students learn best when they get to do things. We're teaching ourselves about the topic we don't know in our own language, and we can also teach it to other students. That idea of interacting, collaborating with themselves in a safe environment, an environment that's structured by a faculty member, instead of really complicated academic language. So students can do and learn in ways that are approachable to them. So a great successful story of recognizing maybe a lack of open educational resources in her specific discipline and her specific course, and Jess Kruger at University of Buffalo really turning the table, so to speak, and saying, well, if there isn't something, I can make something. Going to turn it back to Ed now to talk again about Waymaker and some of the messaging tools that enable a really tightly aligned interaction between learning content, students' level of comprehension and engagement with that content, and faculty's ability to provide in-the-minute updates to students of how they are doing.
Okay. So I am showing you an English composition course. And I'm just going to go into the faculty resources. When you upload a Waymaker course, by default, there is also a faculty resources area, which is usually hidden and kept unpublished from the students. So you can go in there, but your students can't. And here's this important link over here called Waymaker Faculty Tools. In the first kind of section that I took over the presentation on, I really focused on assessment. Frequent and periodic assessment built throughout the entire course structure, with some of those being really low stakes and some of those being higher stakes where the grade would go back into the grade book. But what I really like about Waymaker in particular is that it also takes those assessments and pushes some automated messaging through here. So I'm going to actually go up here to the top right corner like I was setting up this course for the first time. And I'm going to go and say, okay, I'm going to configure Waymaker. One of the things that Waymaker does is it's going to send out emails periodically through the class, and it's going to look like it comes from my email address. It doesn't come from a do not reply email address. When the email goes out, it comes to the students, it looks like, oh, Ed Beck is sending me a message. And we can put our own name in here. And we can also just kind of put, you know, how we want to sign that message, whether I want to put Mr. Beck, whether I'm on a very personal term like I am with you in this course because we're kind of collaborating here as peers, or just how you want to sign that message. And then Waymaker is going to give you some recommendations about when they think you should intervene with certain things. So I'm going to keep going in here, and it's all set from the kind of mastery mindset that Waymaker was designed with. Waymaker is designed with an idea that once you get to a certain threshold, we can call that mastery. By default, that's 80%. But if I decide, you know what, in my class, when I'm talking about mastery, I really mean 90%. For my class, what I really mean is 93%, because that's what my students really want as an A+. That's going to kind of set the settings for a lot of these things, because as they're taking these quizzes, we're going to be asking, did they reach that mastery goal or did they not meet that mastery goal? Now, what Waymaker is going to give me is it's going to give me some templates for communication that I can keep modifying. We have the coach mindset, which is like, hey man, keep going. And the advisor mindset that's like, I fully believe that you can achieve greatness in this course. Okay, so we've got kind of two personalities that are in here. I'm going to select coach. It kind of fits my exuberant lifestyle a little bit more. So I'm going to look at the coach, and now what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, what if a student skips over all of those assessments and readings that I was referring to as just for me? What if a student's skipping over those and going right to the quiz and then they're not doing so hot. Here's what a sample message might look like. Hey, do you know I give you 2 attempts on every quiz? Did you know that you can go through and do those self-checks first and then try again? That message will be automatically pushed out to that student who is identified as, oh, you're skipping all the formative stuff and jumping right to the assessment. That's pretty cool. There's 3 of these messages. It kind of rotates through them. And I have the option here of deleting this and putting my own language in here. But this is what the student's going to see. They're going to see me sending an email to their first name. Hey, try again. Do the self-checks first. What I really like is who has time to send emails to the students that are doing a great job. Check out this. If you get a good score, your student's going to receive an email from you that says, hey, fantastic work. Those are the ones that are automatically pushed out. But Waymaker will also tell you, hey, there might be students in your class that you want to reach out more personally to. And I really like this because it focuses on a key characteristic. We all know that sometimes there's students that don't interact with the course materials and they don't do well. But the students that I really want to reach out to are the ones that are doing all of the work and still struggling. So that's what these messages are. Students who are trying but still struggling. And so they kind of prompt you and say, hey, would you want to reach out to this person? This person is going through, they're doing all of the readings, they're doing all of the self-checks, they're trying multiple times, and they're still struggling. Is it time for you to go and do a little intervention here? And what I like about this is when we're in the middle of teaching a course, our cognitive load is so high. We've got so many things that we're trying to balance, and it gives you some space filler. It says, oh, here are the topics that they're struggling on. Modify this message, but start with this. Here are the messages they're struggling on. Maybe I can write in my own office hours in here. If I don't use Skype on my campus, but I use Microsoft Teams, I can put that right in here and customize that message. Okay, so I could take a little bit of time using their framework, and then it can help me continue to communicate with my students throughout the course. And I thought what was really powerful last year at CIT is I invited one of my faculty members that was using Waymaker, and she printed out her student perception of instructions. We call them spies at SUNY Oneonta. She just started reading out her student comments. Thank you for caring so much. Thank you for reaching out to me throughout the course. And so I know that a lot of these are automated messages, and it might give you some feelings about automated messaging and whether that's appropriate. But what the instructors that have bought into this and are using this have really said is the conversations that started because of the automated messaging were things that needed to happen. It started the conversations throughout the course that needed to happen because my students felt like I really cared about them and was really invested in their success.
Thanks, Ed. Some great comments in the chat. I'll definitely follow up with some people with some other additional resources. Keep those questions coming. I'm going to share my screen again. And thanks for the walkthrough of Waymaker's messaging tools. I will say that the other platform that I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, so to speak, Carnegie Mellon's OLI has similar interaction tools and dashboard tools. Oh, I have to fly through this whole thing as Waymaker. So don't think this is a one-stop operation. And also, I do want to acknowledge that, and I was just having this conversation in the chat. In some cases, you may have content in your course that is copyrighted, that's produced by a traditional publisher, that works really well for your course. You've had a good engagement with your students. You like the content, how it's structured. You like how it's updated. If that's working for you and it's working for your students, my goodness, don't change. Don't change a good thing. Our goal in SUNY OER services is to make sure faculty are aware of the possibilities and the choices that are available to them. We are not in the business of making sure that everybody uses OER. That would be a drastic misrepresentation of what's available in OER, and also a drastic misrepresentation of the responsibility and the freedom that faculty have to choose learning materials that are available to them. So don't feel as if my role here is to make sure you all use OER. My role is to make sure that you know what's available and what's not available. Back to the topic at hand, Ed was talking about the interactions. My colleague in SUNY OER Services, Tony DeFranco, also adjuncts at SUNY Cortland for some business and marketing courses. He uses Waymaker as a tool, as his course content, and he got some great feedback from his students last semester. And I'm sharing a couple quotes here. The first is the emails that I was doing very good. So that modality that Ed, the mixed groups that Ed just talked about, doing very good, were a great confidence booster. When I had questions, you always contacted me back. So when I think interactions are established and consistent interactions are established with students, there's a level of appreciation on both sides. The second quote, thank you. I remained patient with myself after missing several questions on the pretest and the try it sections, and carefully reviewed my mistakes to get a better grip of the material. I really like the learning module design. It's very effective at providing a deep understanding of the material via the mini quizzes and the practice questions. Thanks again. I think the second most successful thing that we can do beyond getting students excited about learning is represented in the second quote, which is to get students to really think deeply and reflect on what works for them as learners. In this quote that I really like, the learning design module, it's effective at providing a deep understanding of the material to me, to this student, certainly is a testament to that.
You know, in Waymaker, when you're going through this, it starts to color code for the students. And I showed that when I did that first walkthrough about how they're doing on those automatically graded self-assessments. Oscar asks us to think about how we can encourage student metacognition in our courses. A lot of times we do that through things like learning journals. A lot of times we do that through things like a module close-up, where we ask students to reconsider the big question of the module or the big question of this section of the course and look at it. And I just like that we can have some tools that encourage those types of things. I'm not saying that Waymaker is the best thing ever created, but even if we didn't have Waymaker available to us in our courses, what principles can we take from Waymaker that could be applied to any course? Those ideas of low stakes practice, those ideas of being able to try something, get some instant feedback so that we don't fall into the same problems. I think that all the LMSs have some of those basic tools. I think where Waymaker really stands out is not only is the tool there, but it's connected to a communication platform. And that's just really great design. It's only possible because for every page of the textbook, Lumen has gone through and said, here are questions that will refer back to this page. You know, it's incredible work that they've done. And it was really, you know, designing the course for Spanish and going through that process over the past year really said, you know, man, for every page, we need to create 14 questions, 7 questions for the pretest that are just going to be for the students, you know, for their practice, and then 7 different questions for the post-test so that they're not seeing the same questions in each area. They need to be slightly different. It was a huge, intensive process, but I'm glad that we were able to do that work and share it openly, and we're able to use that. Multiple people can use that now.
Thanks, Ed. And I think the reminder to effective design is certainly represented in the final slide I'm going to show. This was a very unscientific, not peer-reviewed in any way, shape, or form study investigation that SUNY OER Services did over the last year. So the first block of text on the upper left, where we looked at campuses and faculty that moved to static OER, so they really just changed content. They might have found content from another source, whether there's a PDF, really none of the interactions, none of the collaboration opportunities, none of the doer effects present in that OER. It did no harm, essentially. So students didn't do better, they didn't do worse. Certainly save students. That's save students money. That's a win, I think, certainly for SUNY students. And this was at multiple campuses across SUNY and 12 courses, so multiple courses in various disciplines. We worked with Erie Community College. They have a large number of faculty that have chosen to use Waymaker, which Ed has talked about in this presentation, in a variety of courses. The faculty there use it in different ways. Again, it's faculty choice in terms of how they use it and what tools they turn on. In courses where Waymaker, OER, where the messaging tools were not turned on, we saw a slight curve towards improved learning, so students doing slightly better in overall learning measured by final grade, but not statistically significant. At that same community college, Erie Community College, for faculty in courses where the Waymaker messaging tools were turned on and the interaction was present with students, there was a statistically significant improvement of half a letter grade. Again, unscientific, not peer reviewed. Hopefully we can grab some more data and do a more official presentation, but I think the early signs are that interactions matter and how we package those interactions, whether they're in a platform that's available at oer.suny.edu or whether it's an intentional design process that you go through in your own course design, engaging with students and using the tools that are available to us to allow for meaningful interactions with students at the point of need and before the point of need certainly have an impact on learning. I'm going to open it up for questions now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat. Certainly willing to talk about anything that hasn't come up in the chat. For Cynthia, I'm going to work backwards. Yes.